My husband said he was going away to find himself, so I showed up at the same resort with his brother. When he saw us by the pool, I knew the war had begun. Stephen, my husband, 35, sat across from me in the kitchen, sipping his morning coffee, his posture ridiculously stiff. We'd been married 7 years, and I've learned to read that tension. He's either hiding something or about to say something I won't like. For the last 6 months, there had been a wall between us, invisible but as strong as steel. It probably started when he was promoted to senior vice president at Capital Trust. It wasn't just his title and salary that changed, he did too. Then came the late corporate dinners, the important weekend calls, and, worst of all, that new, arrogant tone when he spoke about our life together, or about my vintage clothing store, which he considered a cute hobby, not a business. I, Emily, 33, poured my soul and all my savings into that store, but Stephen preferred to think his money was carrying our budget, though the reality wasn't nearly that critical. 20 days ago, to be exact, on Friday, September 27th, he finally dropped the bomb that had apparently been bothering him for weeks. We were having the pasta I'd made using his favorite recipe when he suddenly put his fork down. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he said, and that tone of his, soft but full of condescension, immediately put me on guard. I put my fork down. "I need a break. Not from you, not from the marriage, but I need space to figure myself out, you know?" I didn't know. We weren't teenagers who could just take a pause. We were adults with a shared mortgage, joint accounts, and future plans that I thought we were building together. "Figure yourself out where, Stephen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He gestured vaguely at the whole apartment. "There's just too much here. Too many expectations. I feel trapped. I've taken 2 weeks off work. I'm leaving. Alone. I need to be by myself, think about my career, about us, about where we're going." I felt my heart tighten, but I forced myself to nod. "Okay. Where are you going?" He looked away. "Mexico. Cancun. There's a small resort. Azul Resort and Spa. Very secluded. No one will find me there." His announcement was so dramatic and cliché that I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. But his eyes were serious. "I'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll talk, Emily. Everything will be fine." He didn't even try to hug me or reassure me. He just packed and left the next day, leaving behind a feeling of emptiness I'd never felt before. For the first 3 days, I tried to be the understanding wife. I worked at the store, did yoga, and saw friends. And then the doubt started to creep in. Not doubt about him, doubt about his story. Stephen was never a fan of solo trips. He hated being in silence for too long and always said, "A vacation without someone to appreciate your choices is just a change of scenery, not a rest." On the 4th day, I cracked and opened his laptop. I knew his password, the date of our first meeting, as always. And there, in his hidden document folder, which was actually named Capital Financial Reports, I found something I hadn't expected. There was an email chain. Sender, Meredith Walker. His former colleague, whom he had, 6 months ago, called just a contact who moved to another firm. The subject line of one email read, "Can't wait to see you by the pool, darling." The 2 first-class tickets were a wonderful surprise. And the address? Azul Resort and Spa, Cancun. The departure date was the same as Stephen's. My hand started shaking. This wasn't finding himself. This was running away with a mistress. Hatred and pain mixed inside me into such a potent cocktail that I almost felt faint. I could have had a meltdown, called him, screamed that I knew everything. But I didn't. I just closed the laptop. Instead, I opened mine, found the same hotel in Cancun, and bought the most expensive ocean view suite. I looked at his ticket, at the dates. I had 10 more days to prepare. Stephen thought I'd be sitting at home and mourning, but I decided this was going to be a war. And I needed an ally. Someone who knew Stephen better than anyone, someone who had long suspected something was wrong with him. I dialed the number. "Hey, James. It's Emily. I have a proposition for you that you won't be able to refuse. It's about your brother." James, Stephen's younger brother, was always more of a friend to me than a relative. He's 32, works in design, and is cynical but brutally honest. Unlike Stephen, who was constantly constructing his perfect life image, James wasn't afraid to be himself, even if it meant admitting his older brother was quite a character. Even before this promotion, he'd been telling me, "Emily, your husband is a walking mortgage, he only thinks in numbers. Keep an eye on him." Back then, I didn't believe it. Now I knew. He had always seen it because he knew the real Stephen. "What about him?" James asked into the phone, his voice flat. I didn't beat around the bush. I knew I didn't have time for long explanations. He said he was going to Cancun alone to find himself. He's actually going with Meredith Walker. I bought a ticket to the same resort. And I want you to go with me. A pause hung on the other end, lasting what felt like an eternity. All I could hear was his heavy breathing. "He's an ass," James finally said, and there was no surprise in his voice, only deep, weary disappointment. "You've known he was capable of this for a while, haven't you?" I asked, and I didn't need his verbal reaction, I felt his confirmation through the phone. "I saw him with her in the city a few times. I didn't want to upset you, Emily, there was no proof, and I didn't want to be the one who—" "There is proof," I interrupted. "And it's on his laptop." "So? Are you in? When are we flying?" His tone immediately changed, becoming sharp, businesslike. The pain I'd heard a second ago was replaced by something more dangerous. He didn't just want to help me, he wanted justice for me and perhaps revenge for some old, personal score between them dating back to childhood. "In 9 days. The exact day Stephen arrives. Azul Resort and Spa." I told him the time and my flight number. I booked him a separate room, of course. I didn't need a new husband, I needed an accomplice. James chuckled softly, but it wasn't a cheerful laugh, it was the laugh of a person ready to do something crazy but necessary. "Emily, you are incredible. I don't even know what he did to you, but he deserves this. I'll be ready. See you by the pool." I hung up. My decision was made. This was the start of something I couldn't control, but at the same time I had never felt so strong and determined. I wasn't scared, I was cold and empty inside, and I wanted to fill that void with his humiliation. The plan was simple: show up, explain nothing, and watch his perfect world collapse. This wasn't just revenge. This was my attempt to reclaim my respect. I spent a week in silence, preparing. The scariest part wasn't his cheating, it was how coldly I was planning to destroy him. The 9 days before the flight felt like an entire month condensed into a single, suffocating week. My shop, which was usually my refuge, felt stale. I could barely focus on inventory or talking to customers about the history of a 1950s silk scarf. All my mental energy was consumed by the plan, which was beginning to feel less like a sharp, satisfying revenge and more like a cold, calculated surgical strike. And the realization that I was capable of such cold calculation was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. I kept replaying Stephen's face, that bland, entitled look he had when he announced his finding himself trip, and it fueled me enough to keep going. The hurt was still there, a dull ache right behind my ribs, but it was now tightly wrapped in a layer of righteous, silent fury. My only contact during this time was James. We spoke twice. He didn't ask me for details about the emails or how I felt, which I appreciated. He was all business, like a general preparing for battle. The first call was about logistics. "I booked the flight you suggested, Emily," he said, his voice low, sounding like he was already halfway into the conspiracy. "Connecting flight in Dallas. I'll arrive about an hour after you. I'll go straight to my room, get settled. No grand entrance at the airport. We need to maintain the element of surprise until the moment of impact." "Agreed," I said, leaning against the cold marble countertop, feeling a strange mix of dread and anticipation. "Steven knows your flight schedule, right?" "He wouldn't check, but—" "He wouldn't," James cut in, a trace of bitter amusement in his voice. "He assumes I'm too busy being this starving artist little brother to afford a trip to Cancun, let alone one timed so perfectly. He won't be looking for me. He's too focused on his own narrative." And that was it. Steven's entire life was a narrative he carefully crafted, the successful banker, the devoted husband, the man who needed a break. It was all a carefully constructed stage set, and I was about to walk on and kick over the scenery. The irony was I had been his biggest supporter, the silent stagehand making sure the lighting was perfect. Now, I was the saboteur. The second call with James was 2 days before departure. This time, the conversation took a turn that deepened the whole mess, revealing a long-standing fault line between the brothers that went beyond the usual sibling rivalry. "Listen, James started, dropping the professional tone. "When you told me about Meredith, it wasn't a shock. I didn't say anything earlier because I genuinely thought he'd snap out of it. This isn't just a fling for him. It's about status. Meredith is from a wealthy family, the kind of connection Steven always craves. She's his trophy upgrade." I gripped my phone tightly. "A trophy upgrade? What are you talking about, James?" "He's always seen marriage as a corporate ladder," James explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You know how our parents weren't exactly high society? Steven made his whole life about shedding that skin. You were perfect when he met you, smart, ambitious, but still small business. Manageable. Now that he's senior VP, he needs the matching accessory. Someone from the right lineage. Meredith fits that role." His words hit harder than the email chain. The cheating was a betrayal of our vows, this was a betrayal of my entire value to him. I was starting to see the true depth of Steven's transactional view of our marriage. It was never love, just a strategic partnership he had decided to terminate once a better offer came along. "He told me I was his soulmate," I whispered, the absurdity of the memory making me feel hollow. "He probably told his boss the same thing right before he got that promotion," James retorted bluntly. "That's how he operates. He believes his own lies. And that's why we have to hit him where it hurts the most, his public image, his sense of control. Not just his ego." He then added something that gave me pause. "He's been playing this game for years, Remember that money our grandmother left us? The small trust fund? He managed it. He told us both he was making conservative investments, growing it slowly, safely." "Yes, I remember," I said, a shiver running down my spine. That money was my safety net, half of it belonging to James, half to me. "I asked my financial guy to run a quick check on the accounts he set up," James continued. "The returns are good, but he's taken out significant unsecured personal loans against the trust's assets, loans I never approved. Loans that are large enough to cover, say, 2 first-class tickets and a luxury suite in Cancun, probably for several trips." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just infidelity, this was financial manipulation and possibly fraud involving family money. The stakes had just been raised from a messy divorce to something criminal. Steven wasn't just a cheater, he was a manipulator using his family's trust for his own narcissistic endeavors. This new layer of conflict, the money, the deceit on a much grander scale, solidified my decision. This was necessary. "We stick to the plan, James," I said, my voice now completely devoid of emotion. "Cancun. Poolside. No initial confrontation. Just the presentation." "Understood," he confirmed. "See you on the other side, Don't worry about anything. Just pack a killer swimsuit." I didn't laugh. I went through my closet and picked out the most expensive, brightly colored bikini I owned, the one Steven always said was too flashy for me. I wanted to be visible. I wanted to be unmistakable. As I packed my suitcase with clothes I hadn't worn in years, things that screamed single, unapologetic woman, I looked at the framed wedding photo on my bedside table. Stephen's smiling face, mine beaming with genuine hope. I didn't feel sadness, just a stark, sharp clarity. The destruction I was planning wasn't just for him. It was to reclaim the 7 years I had unknowingly spent supporting a fraud. The 10 days passed, and I was ready to board the plane. I knew the moment I stepped onto that resort's polished marble floor, the silence would end, and the confrontation would begin. I wasn't going to be the grieving wife, I was going to be the orchestrator of his downfall. The plane took off, and I looked down at the shrinking city, at the life I was leaving behind, and felt nothing but the hard, cold certainty of my purpose. Stephen had given me 2 weeks to think. I had used it to launch a counter-operation. And it was going to be brutal. The plane landed, and the minute I stepped into the resort lobby, I saw them. They looked like the perfect, sun-kissed couple he always wished we were. I grabbed James's hand, the silent war was about to go public. Landing in Cancun was like stepping into a blast furnace, but the intense, humid heat didn't touch the cold precision of my resolve. James and I met just outside the customs area. We didn't hug or exchange pleasantries, a sharp, meaningful nod was enough. We were 2 professionals on an assignment. We took separate taxis to the Azul Resort and Spa, maintaining the illusion of separate travelers, even though our rooms were conveniently located in the same wing, overlooking the main infinity pool. The synchronicity of our arrival was crucial. Stephen had landed 2 days earlier, giving him just enough time to settle into his narrative of luxury and romance. My room was immense, unnecessarily luxurious, all marble and glass overlooking the turquoise sweep of the ocean. It was the kind of money-flaunting gesture that Stephen lived for. I didn't even unpack properly. My focus was elsewhere. James sent a single text, "Ready when you are. Let's make this quick." I changed into the chosen bikini, the expensive, bright coral one, and threw on a crisp white linen cover-up. I felt oddly detached, like I was dressing up a character in a movie. The girl in the mirror looked formidable, not heartbroken. This was not about looking good, it was about sending a visual statement of my absolute, unwavering control. I met James 10 minutes later by the elevator. He was wearing tailored dark swim shorts and a linen shirt, looking relaxed, like he belonged there. He handed me a large pair of designer sunglasses. "Protection," he murmured. "You don't want him to read your eyes." We walked toward the main pool area. The resort noise, the splash of water, the distant Latin music, the high-pitched laughter, was overwhelming, creating a confusing backdrop for the silent drama we were about to stage. My hands were steady, but the muscles in my jaw felt tight. And then I saw them. They were exactly where I knew they would be, by the swim-up bar, tucked into a private cabana that screamed VIP access. Stephen was laughing, the sound carrying easily over the water. He was tanned already, looking younger, more vibrant than he had in years. His arm was casually slung around Meredith's shoulders. She was flawless, perfectly styled hair, expensive-looking white swimsuit, diamond studs catching the light. They looked exactly like the corporate power couple Stephen had spent years trying to emulate. They looked happy, untroubled, and completely oblivious to the fact that their quiet vacation was about to be obliterated. For a sharp, agonizing second, the cold certainty wavered. The sight of them, so relaxed, so right together in this perfect setting, was a physical punch. It was the absolute confirmation that my entire marriage had been a lie, an inconvenient placeholder until the trophy upgrade was secured. That brief moment of real, unadulterated pain was the last thing I allowed myself to feel. I turned to James, my eyes shielded by the large lenses. "Now," I stated, the single word clipped and final. We started walking towards the pool deck. We didn't rush. We moved with the measured pace of people who have nowhere else to be. James put his hand lightly on the small of my back, a proprietary gesture that felt absolutely necessary for the performance. We found 2 empty loungers, strategically placed about 50 feet from their cabana, right on the edge of the main circulation path, ensuring maximum visibility. I sat down, taking my time. I slowly removed my cover-up, folded it neatly, and draped it over the chair. I removed the sunglasses, placed them on the small table next to a fictional cocktail order, and then looked directly towards the cabana. James sat next to me, picking up a resort magazine, but I knew his attention was elsewhere. He was waiting for the shot. It took less than 30 seconds. Stephen had turned his head, perhaps to look for a waiter or just to scan the crowd with the self-important air he always carried in public. His eyes swept across the pool area, quickly dismissing the hundreds of unfamiliar faces. And then they stopped. They locked onto me. The immediate transformation on his face was startling. The sun-kissed, carefree mask shattered instantly. It wasn't confusion I saw first, it was pure, unadulterated terror. His jaw didn't just drop, it physically sagged, pulling his face into an expression of utter disbelief and panic. His entire body stiffened, instantly losing the relaxed posture he'd adopted. He looked back at Meredith, then back at me, as if trying to reconcile the impossibility of the scene. "Emily, here?" The silent question was screaming from across the pool. Then his eyes shifted to James, who chose that precise moment to look up from his magazine, give Stephen a brief, supremely neutral glance, and offer a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of his head, a silent acknowledgement that said, "Yes, it's us. And yes, we're together." That's when Stephen's face turned from terror to a deep, sickly red. He understood the implication immediately. I was not alone. I was not the tearful, heartbroken wife who stayed home to mourn. I was here, with his brother, looking completely unbothered, enjoying the very luxury he had planned for himself and his mistress. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Meredith, noticing the sudden, complete halt in Stephen's attention, finally turned to see what he was looking at. Her gaze landed on me, then James. She didn't recognize James, but she recognized the expression on Stephen's face. She followed his line of sight, saw me, and her own smile evaporated. She whispered something to him, but Stephen didn't respond. He was locked on us. I picked up my phone, opened the camera app, and took a deliberate, slow picture of the palm trees behind them, making sure my action was visible. Then I looked straight at Stephen, and for the first time in 10 days, I allowed a small, cold, utterly pitiless smile to touch my lips. It was a sign. The game was over. The hard, public conflict had begun, and he was the one caught completely exposed. We didn't move. We didn't approach. We just sat there, two figures of silent, devastating judgment, allowing the tension to coil and tighten across the distance of the pool deck. His reaction was better than any yelling match I could have orchestrated. The sheer public shock had completely destabilized him. I knew I had won this round, but the real fight, the one about the money, the one that would ruin his perfect corporate image, was still waiting in the wings. He sent me the text, "You've ruined everything. Our family is destroyed." I replied with a single photo of his latest fraudulent bank statement. The real war isn't about the marriage, it's about the $200,000 missing from our grandmother's trust. The tension by the pool didn't break, it thickened, turning the bright midday air into something suffocatingly heavy. After the initial shock, that raw, visceral panic on Stephen's face, he recovered slightly, forcing himself to stand up. He grabbed Meredith's arm with a tight, proprietary grip, pulling her away from the cabana and quickly ushering her towards a side entrance of the resort, avoiding the main path. He didn't look back. His exit was not one of defiance, but of immediate, desperate damage control. He was fleeing the scene. James and I remained exactly where we were. We ordered drinks, mine a ridiculously bright, non-alcoholic concoction, James's a strong rum punch, and settled in for the wait. We knew he wouldn't let this sit. Stephen couldn't stand being out of control, especially not in a public, exposed situation. His silence would be brief, followed by an explosive attempt to regain the narrative. My phone vibrated 30 minutes later. It was him. "Stephen, what the hell is this, Emily? Are you insane?" I took a slow sip of my drink, the ice clinking against the glass. The silence from James was absolute, he was pretending to read his magazine, but I felt his focus. "Emily, I'm on vacation. You recommended the resort, remember? Very secluded. Stephen, don't play games. Who is that with you? Why is James here? Emily, he's also on vacation. You're not the only one who needs to figure things out, Stephen. Though I'm pretty sure I figured out all I needed a week ago. Stephen, you're embarrassing me. Get on the next flight home. We will discuss this like adults. You are causing an unnecessary scene. Emily, scene? I'm sitting by the pool. You're the one hiding in your room with your colleague. That's when the tone shifted, moving from frustrated banker to panicked husband trying to save his image. Stephen, you've ruined everything. Our family is destroyed. You know what this looks like, Emily. I told you I needed space. This is extreme. You are the villain here. This was the core of Stephen's moral compass. Everything was always my fault, and his actions were always justified. He genuinely believed that my response to his deceit, my highly visible, public appearance with his own brother, was the true act of betrayal. That realization, that he felt victimized, was the final push I needed to move to the next stage of the plan. I glanced at James. He put the magazine down and gave me a slight, expectant nod. The time for the big reveal had come. I opened the document app on my phone. I had prepared a single, high-resolution screenshot of the bank statement James had accessed. It showed the latest, massive, unauthorized withdrawal from the joint trust fund, the money our grandmother had left us, meant for our long-term security. The withdrawal was dated just 2 weeks ago, shortly before the plane tickets were purchased. The label was suspiciously vague, investment reallocation, private. I didn't type a single word. I simply sent the image. The silence on the other end was deafening, lasting a full 5 minutes. The air felt charged, as if the entire weight of Stephen's carefully constructed financial and marital facade was now resting on a single digital image. When his reply finally came, it wasn't a text message. It was a call. A frantic, vibrating call from an unknown number, his resort cell. I let it ring twice, then I answered. Emily. What the hell is that? Stephen's voice was hoarse, stripped of all corporate composure. He was shouting, but trying to keep it a low, dangerous growl. The panic was real this time. It wasn't about the marriage anymore, it was about prison time and ruin. Hello, Stephen, I said, my voice calm, almost unnervingly soft. It's a bank statement. Yours. And James's. And mine. From our trust fund. The one you've been conservatively managing for the last 7 years. You shouldn't have that. That's private. That's illegal. What did you do? Did you hack my accounts? I'll call the police. He sputtered, the words tumbling over each other. You'll call the police on your wife who discovered you drained her inheritance to fund your expensive vacation with your mistress? I countered, letting the key words hang in the air like poison. I don't think your employers at Capital Trust would appreciate that kind of publicity, Stephen. Especially when they realize the private investment reallocation was likely for non-business expenditures. The shouting stopped instantly. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. He knew I had him. The sight of James and me at the pool was a humiliation. This was a potential professional and legal catastrophe. James knows, he finally whispered, the horror in his voice palpable. James knows, I confirmed. He helped me track down the details. He wasn't surprised, actually. Said you always needed a bigger, shinier toy than you could actually afford. He wants his half back, Stephen. And I want mine. Now came the moral dilemma, the sharp turn in the story that I had anticipated. Stephen took a desperate, calculated gamble. Okay, listen to me, he pleaded, his voice dropping to a seductive, manipulative whisper, the one he used when he wanted me to drop a fight. I can fix this. I can pay it back, with interest. We can still fix us, Em. We can tell them, the company, James, anyone, that you made a mistake. That you were emotional. We can go home. We can salvage the marriage. But if you pursue this financial angle, everything is over. My career is over. We lose the house. You lose everything. Is that what you want? To destroy everything we built just to get back at me for a stupid mistake? He was trying to flip the script one last time, making my pursuit of justice the ultimate act of destruction. He was offering me a way out, a chance to preserve the image of our life, the house, the social standing, at the cost of my dignity and the truth. If I agreed, I would be complicit in his fraud, forever holding the secret, but I would walk away with financial stability. If I refused, I would lose the material comforts of our life, but I would gain complete emotional freedom and justice. I looked at James, who was now watching me, his face impassive. This was my moment of decision, the moment where I had to choose between security and truth, between the marriage's illusion and my own freedom. Your mistake, Stephen, I said, the words cutting through the resort noise, was assuming I value the house more than I value the truth. You don't get to bargain with stolen money. Not anymore. I hung up, closing the app and powering off my phone entirely. The conversation was over. The negotiation was done. Now, the explosion was inevitable. He barged into my room, his face a mask of pure, violent rage. He said I'd ruined him. I told him he did that himself, and then I watched him choose his career over the last shred of our marriage. I put the phone on the nightstand, powered off, and looked at James. The air in the room, with its scent of sea salt and expensive polish, felt utterly foreign to the brutality of the fight we were now engaged in. That was the trigger, I stated, my voice flat. He's past saving the marriage. He's in survival mode, worried about Capital Trust and the SEC, not about me. He's going to come here. He's going to try to intimidate me into silence. And that's when we finish this, James confirmed, his expression grim. He looked tired, the thrill of the ambush having evaporated, leaving behind the exhaustion of dealing with his brother's destructive nature. He crossed the room and stood by the door, a silent, immovable presence. We didn't have to wait long. Maybe 20 minutes later, a loud, insistent pounding rattled the door. It wasn't a polite knock, it was the sound of something barely contained exploding outwards. Emily! Open this door. We need to talk. Now. Stephen's voice was strained, muffled but clearly audible through the heavy wood. I looked at James, who nodded. I took a deep breath, walked over, and unlocked the door. I didn't step back, I stood my ground, forcing him to stop short in the doorway. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His face was blotchy red, his resort shirt was wrinkled, and his hair was slick with sweat. His eyes, those usually calculating, controlled eyes, were wild and completely focused on me. What the hell is wrong with you? He spat out, trying to push past me into the room. Don't, James said instantly, stepping forward and planting himself firmly between us. James's tone was calm, low, and utterly commanding, which was a sharp contrast to Stephen's sputtering rage. You're not coming in here, Stephen. This conversation happens right here, in the hallway, where everyone can hear your professional downfall. Stephen froze, seeing James for the first time in his capacity as an opponent, not a little brother. The realization that James was actively siding against him, and knew about the financial fraud, hit him like a physical blow. You traitor, Stephen hissed at James. You're letting her destroy your family money over a petty fling? Are you serious? The fling is petty, but the $200,000 you stole from the trust isn't, James retorted, not raising his voice. You used our inheritance to pay for this little ego trip. That's not a mistake, Stephen. That's theft. And I'm protecting my interests, which, frankly, are also Emily's. Stephen turned back to me, ignoring James. The pleading tone from the phone call was gone, replaced by desperate, wounded anger. You did this on purpose. You orchestrated this whole public scene. You've ruined my reputation. My career is on the line because of this juvenile, vindictive stunt. Your career is on the line because you're a fraud, I said, my voice finally rising, but staying perfectly controlled. This wasn't screaming, this was articulation. You didn't need to find yourself in Cancun. You needed to run away from a life you bought with lies. You didn't just cheat on me with Meredith, you cheated on our entire life, Stephen. The money, the pauses, the late nights, it was all about building a fake life you could barely afford. I didn't ruin you. You did that when you decided my value was disposable and our family trust was your personal piggy bank. He staggered back, his composure finally breaking. He covered his face with his hands, making a low, defeated sound. This was the climax. This was the moment of absolute exposure, and he couldn't stand the light. I'll pay it back, he mumbled, his voice thick. I'll pay James back his share, and yours. Just tell James you were mistaken about the source of the funds. Tell him I was liquidating some poor-performing assets and you jumped to conclusions. We can still save the house. We can save appearances. I'll break it off with Meredith today. We can go home tonight. This was his final offer, the truth in exchange for money and the illusion of a salvageable life. He was asking me to compromise my integrity one last time to protect his financial standing. No, I said simply. I pulled the small divorce papers I'd had my lawyer draft before I left and tossed them at his chest. They fluttered to the marble floor. You're not going to save anything. I don't want your money, Stephen. I want a divorce. And James and I will ensure that the trust fund is properly audited and restored. You can tell your firm whatever you like, but the truth will come out when the paperwork is filed. I'm not lying for you anymore. He looked down at the papers, then back at me, and I saw the shift. The desperation was replaced by a cold, hard decision. He realized I was serious, that I was not bluffing about the divorce or the financial repercussions. He straightened up, brushing off his shirt. The loving husband was gone, replaced entirely by the ruthless CEO. Fine, he sneered, his voice dangerously low. You want to play hardball, Emily? You'll get it. You will regret this. I will take you for everything. The house, the store, everything. You started this war, and you're going to lose it all. He turned and strode away down the hall without another word, not looking back at Meredith's room, not looking at James. His focus was already back on damage control, on calling his corporate lawyer. The marriage was over, finalized not by tears, but by the cold calculation of a man choosing his professional facade over his human connection. I watched him go, the adrenaline slowly draining out of me, leaving me trembling. James put a steadying hand on my shoulder. He's going to fight you, Em. Hard, James murmured. I know, I replied, looking out at the glittering turquoise ocean. The resort, the sunlight, the perfect weather, it all seemed like a cruel joke. I had walked away from the security of our life, but I was standing free. The next day, James and I flew home separately, as planned. The total duration of the trip was just 4 days. I arrived home to an empty house. Stephen was already gone, having moved into a corporate apartment. The fight for the money, the house, the store, it had begun. It was going to be ugly, public, and expensive. I sat down on our pristine white sofa and looked at the empty space where his golf clubs used to be. I had sacrificed financial security to gain back my self-respect and the truth. Was it worth the financial risk, the inevitable, brutal legal fight? I didn't know. But for the first time in 7 years, I felt like the author of my own life, not just a character in his carefully written script. I had chosen truth over comfort. I had chosen myself. So, as I gear up for the ugliest divorce of my life, the question remains, was I the asshole for not just going home quietly and taking the settlement? Was destroying his life the only way to save mine? Or did I just trade a dishonest marriage for an honest poverty?